I never thought 4 simple words could shatter my world so completely. Standing in our bedroom doorway, watching Marcus pack his designer swim shorts into his weekend bag, I asked the question that would change everything. "Can I come with you?" His response still echoes in my mind like a cruel mantra. "You're too fat for the beach, Claire. Stay home." The casual cruelty in his voice, the way he didn't even look up from his packing, the dismissive wave of his hand as if I were nothing more than an annoying interruption to his perfect weekend plans with his college buddies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That moment, standing there in my oversized pajamas at 32 years old, feeling invisible in my own marriage, was when I realized I'd been slowly disappearing for years. Marcus had been chipping away at my confidence, with comments disguised as concern, suggestions wrapped in fake love, and comparisons that left me feeling worthless. But that morning, as I watched him zip up his bag and head off to Malibu without me, something deep inside finally snapped awake. My name is Claire Davidson, and for 8 years I'd been married to a man who saw me as a project that had failed. We'd met in graduate school when I was studying marketing, and he was finishing his MBA. Back then, I was confident, vibrant, size 12, and comfortable in my own skin. I had opinions, dreams, and a laugh that could fill a room. Marcus used to say my confidence was what first attracted him to me. Somewhere along the way, though, my confidence became something he needed to control. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment about my second helping at dinner. A suggestion that maybe I should try the salad instead of the pasta. Compliments that came with conditions. "You look great, but imagine how amazing you'd look if you lost just 10 pounds. Each comment felt like love at the time, like he cared enough about me to help me be my best self. After we married, Marcus's suggestions became more frequent, more pointed. He'd bring home workout DVDs and leave them on my nightstand. He'd book me sessions with personal trainers without asking, then act hurt when I wasn't grateful enough. He'd compare me to his friends, wives, always in subtle ways that left me feeling lacking. "Jennifer looks incredible since she started that new diet. Maybe you should ask her about it." The worst part was that he made it all seem like love, like concern for my health and happiness. By year 5 of our marriage, I'd gained 40 pounds and lost most of myself. The marketing career I'd loved became something I did from home, freelance work that barely paid the bills, while Marcus climbed the corporate ladder at his investment firm. I spent my days in yoga pants and oversized sweaters, ordering groceries online to avoid the judgment I imagined in every stranger's eyes. I'd stopped going to the gym because Marcus would critique my workout clothes, my form, my effort. I'd stopped cooking elaborate meals because he'd comment on the calories. I'd stopped doing most things that brought me joy because somehow, everything I enjoyed was wrong according to Marcus. The beach comment wasn't even the worst thing he'd said to me over the years. It was just the final drop that caused the dam to burst. As I stood in our empty house that Saturday morning, listening to the silence he'd left behind, I made a decision that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I was going to disappear, all right, but not in the way Marcus expected. I started with Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist I found online who specialized in emotional abuse recovery. I'd never thought of my marriage in those terms before, but our first session opened my eyes to patterns I'd been blind to for years. "Claire," she said gently during our third meeting, "when did you stop believing your own thoughts were valid?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I couldn't remember the last time I trusted my own judgment about anything. Dr. Chen helped me understand that Marcus's behavior wasn't love. It was control disguised as concern. Every suggestion, every comparison, every critique had been designed to make me smaller, more dependent, easier to manage. "He's been training you to doubt yourself," she explained. Classic psychological manipulation. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? What I did was create a plan. Not a diet plan or an exercise routine, but a complete life reconstruction plan. I opened my own bank account that Marcus didn't know about. I started funneling my freelance income into it. building a safety net that would give me options. I began saying no to his suggestions, ignoring his comments and reclaiming small pieces of myself that I'd surrendered over the years. The physical transformation started almost by accident. I began taking long walks in the early morning before Marcus woke up, not to lose weight but to clear my head and think. These walks became my meditation, my planning time, my connection to the strength I'd forgotten I possessed. I started preparing meals I actually wanted to eat instead of the bland, restrictive foods Marcus preferred. I bought clothes that fit my current body instead of hiding in shapeless sacks, and something magical happened. I started feeling human again. Marcus barely noticed the changes at first. He was so accustomed to my compliance, my invisibility, that he didn't register the small rebellions I was staging daily. When I bought a bright red dress that actually showed my figure, he frowned and asked if I was sure it was flattering. When I started going to yoga classes, he wondered aloud if I shouldn't try something more intensive. But for the first time in years, I didn't change course based on his disapproval. I kept the dress, I kept going to yoga. The real breakthrough came 6 months after the beach incident. I was at Target, of all places, buying groceries when I ran into my old college roommate Jenny, whom I hadn't seen in 3 years. She took one look at me and gasped. "Claire! Oh my God, you look incredible! There's something different about you. You're glowing." I caught my reflection in the store's security monitor and was shocked by what I saw. Not because I looked dramatically different physically, though I had lost some weight, but because of the light in my eyes. I looked alive again. Jenny and I went for coffee, and I found myself laughing. Actually laughing. For the first time in months. She told me about her divorce, her new career as a photographer, her recent trip to Italy, where she'd gone alone and loved every minute of it. "You know what changed everything for me?" she said. "The day I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to live my own life." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. That night, when Marcus came home from another weekend business trip, he found me in the kitchen making dinner and humming. "You seem different," he said, and there was suspicion in his voice rather than pleasure. "Have you been taking those antidepressants I suggested?" The question revealed everything I needed to know about how he saw me. In his mind, my happiness could only come from medication, not from reclaiming my life. "No," I said simply, not offering any explanation. For the first time in years, I let him wonder. Let him question. Let him be the one feeling uncertain. Over the following months, I continued my quiet revolution. I rejoined the marketing firm I'd left years earlier, negotiating a part-time remote position that would rebuild my professional confidence and financial independence. I started seeing friends Marcus had gradually discouraged me from maintaining. I bought a gym membership and started working with a trainer named Rosa, who focused on strength rather than weight loss, who taught me to see my body as powerful rather than problematic. The most important change was internal. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped asking permission for basic human activities. I stopped shrinking myself to fit into Marcus's narrow definition of an.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Acceptable wife. When he criticized my food choices, I'd say, "That's interesting," and continue eating. When he suggested I might want to wear something different, I'd say, "I like this," and leave the house as planned. When he compared me to other women, I'd change the subject without acknowledging the comparison. Marcus began to panic as he realized he was losing control. His comments became more frequent, more desperate. He started bringing home diet books, workout equipment, magazine articles about getting your wife back on track. He scheduled appointments with doctors, nutritionists, and trainers without consulting me, then acted bewildered when I refused to go. "I'm just trying to help you be your best self," he'd say, and I'd respond, "I'm perfectly capable of determining what that looks like." The transformation people noticed wasn't primarily physical, though my body had changed as a natural result of treating it with respect rather than punishment. I'd lost weight, yes, but more importantly, I'd gained presence. I stood taller, spoke clearer, took up space without apologizing for it. My skin looked better because I wasn't constantly stressed and anxious. My hair looked healthier because I was nourishing my body properly. My clothes looked better because I was choosing them for myself, rather than to hide from Marcus's judgment. Jenny became a regular part of my life again, and through her, I met other women who were reclaiming their lives in various ways. We started an informal group we jokingly called the Sunday Survivors, meeting weekly at different restaurants to share our struggles and victories. These women became my mirror, reflecting back the strength and beauty Marcus had trained me not to see. One Sunday, Jenny brought her camera to our brunch and started taking candid photos of our group. When she showed me the pictures later, I was stunned. The woman in those photos was radiant, confident, genuinely happy. She bore little resemblance to the defeated woman who'd stood in that bedroom doorway 10 months earlier. "This is who you really are," Jenny said quietly. "This is who you've always been underneath all that doubt he planted in your mind." Marcus's panic reached a crescendo when he realized that other people were noticing my transformation. His colleague's wife mentioned at a company party that I looked absolutely radiant and asked what I was doing differently. His mother called to say she was so happy to hear the life back in my voice during our phone calls. Even the mailman commented that I seemed to have a spring in my step lately. "People are starting to talk," Marcus said one evening, as if my improved appearance and demeanor were somehow embarrassing to him. "They're asking questions about what you're doing, what's changed." I looked at him across our dining room table, this man who'd spent years trying to make me invisible, now complaining that I was becoming too visible. "What kind of questions?" I asked calmly. "About your diet, your exercise routine, whether you're seeing someone." The last part slipped out before he could stop himself, revealing his deepest fear. In Marcus's mind, the only reason a woman would improve herself was to attract another man. The idea that I might be doing it for myself, for my own joy and satisfaction, never occurred to him. "Are you accusing me of having an affair?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. "I'm just saying it looks suspicious when a wife suddenly starts taking care of herself after years of not." There it was. His admission that he preferred me diminished, that my previous state of depression and self-neglect had been more comfortable for him than my current vitality. Any remaining doubt I had about my decision to rebuild my life evaporated in that moment. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came Marcus's announcement about the annual company beach retreat in San Diego. For the past 3 years, I'd begged off these events, claiming illness or work obligations, because Marcus had made it clear my presence would be an embarrassment. This year, for the first time, he actually asked if I wanted to come. "I don't know, Claire," he said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe this year would be good for you. Fresh air, sunshine, time to relax." What he really meant was that he wanted to keep an eye on me, to control the narrative around my transformation, to make sure I didn't outshine him or attract attention he couldn't manage. I looked at him with new clarity. "You mean I'm not too fat for the beach anymore?" His face flushed red. "I never said that." "You said exactly that, last June, when you were packing for the Malibu trip. Your exact words were, 'You're too fat for the beach, Claire. Stay home.' You're being dramatic. I was just suggesting that maybe you weren't ready for a beach vacation at that time." The gaslighting was so automatic, so practiced, that I almost admired its efficiency. Almost. Instead, I smiled and said, "You're right. I wasn't ready then, but I am now." What Marcus didn't know was that I'd already been invited to the retreat, not as his +1, but as a professional in my own right. The marketing firm where I'd rebuilt my career had landed a major contract with Marcus's investment company, and they'd requested that I be the lead consultant on the project. When the retreat invitation came through my professional email, I'd accepted immediately without mentioning it to Marcus. The morning we left for San Diego, Marcus was unusually attentive, complimenting my travel outfit and asking if I needed help with my luggage. His solicitude felt foreign after months of indifference, and I realized he was nervous about how I'd be received by his colleagues. The woman he'd married 8 years ago had been confident and social, someone who enhanced his professional image. The woman he'd spent years diminishing, wouldn't have been an asset at company events. But this new version of me, confident but not controllable, attractive but not dependent on his validation, was an unknown quantity he couldn't predict or manage. The retreat was held at a luxury resort overlooking La Jolla Cove, the kind of place where the rooms cost more per night than most people earn in a week. As we checked in, I noticed Marcus scanning the lobby, cataloging which of his colleagues had arrived, and assessing the competition. This was his world, his domain, where his worth was measured in quarterly reports and networking connections. Our room was beautiful, with a private balcony overlooking the Pacific, and a king-sized bed that Marcus immediately claimed the left side of, just as he had for 8 years. But for the first time, I didn't automatically defer to his preferences. I set my suitcase on the bed and began unpacking, claiming space without asking permission. "The welcome reception is at 6, Marcus said, checking his phone. "I bought you a new cover-up for the pool area tomorrow, something more appropriate." He pulled out a shapeless, matronly black one-piece and a long, flowing cover-up that would hide every inch of my body. I looked at the conservative ensemble, then at the vibrant coral bikini and matching sarong I'd packed, the first two-piece I'd bought in 6 years. "That's thoughtful," I said, "but I already have what I need." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "Claire, I just think at a company event it's better to be conservative. Professional. This is a beach retreat, not a board meeting. People are going to be in swimwear." "Yes, but you're representing me here. People know you're my wife, and they'll judge both of us based on how you present yourself." There was the truth, finally spoken aloud. I wasn't a person in my own right at these events. I was an extension of Marcus, a reflection of his taste and status. My body, my choices, my appearance were all just variables in his professional equation. I hung the coral bikini in the closet next to his swim shorts and said nothing more about it. The welcome reception was held on the resort's oceanfront terrace, with twinkling lights strung between palm trees and servers, circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvre. Marcus immediately launched into networking mode, introducing me to colleagues and clients with practiced smoothness. "This is my wife, Claire," he'd say, his hand possessively on my lower back. "She does marketing consulting work." What struck me was how many people seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Claire, I haven't seen you in ages," said Patricia Monahan, the wife of Marcus's business partner. "You look absolutely stunning. What's your secret?" Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in with something about healthy eating and regular exercise, as if my transformation were his achievement rather than mine. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations that had nothing to do with Marcus or his work. Jenny had been right about confidence being magnetic. People were drawn to the energy I was radiating, wanting to know about my marketing work, my thoughts on industry trends, my recommendations for restaurants and books. For years, I'd been the quiet wife in the corner, barely registering in people's memories. Now I was someone they sought out, remembered, wanted to talk to again. Marcus noticed the shift and didn't like it. When a group of women invited me to join their early morning beach walk, he quickly interjected that I wasn't much of a morning person. When one of the senior partners asked about my consulting work and whether I might be available for a project, Marcus mentioned that I was pretty booked up already. Each time, he was protecting his territory, maintaining control over my interactions and opportunities. But something had fundamentally changed in me. I no longer needed his permission or approval to exist in spaces he'd claimed as his own. When Patricia suggested we grab coffee before the beach activities started the next day, I accepted immediately. When David Chen from the Hong Kong office asked for my business card, I handed it over with a smile. When the conversations moved beyond small talk to substantive discussions about market trends and investment strategies, I participated as an equal rather than sitting silently beside Marcus. By the end of the evening, Marcus was visibly agitated. "You were very social tonight," he said as we rode the elevator back to our room. "I was being myself. You were flirting with David Chen." I looked at him with genuine surprise. I was talking about emerging markets in Southeast Asia. If you consider professional conversation flirting, that says more about you than about me. You gave him your business card. He asked for it. He might have work for my firm. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "I just don't want people to get the wrong impression about my wife." "What impression would that be?" That you're available. The word hung between us like a poison cloud. Available. As if being confident, intelligent, and professionally capable made me somehow unfaithful. As if the only way I could be a proper wife was to remain diminished, dependent, invisible. I unlocked our room door and walked inside without responding. Some conversations weren't worth having anymore. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and slipped out of bed without waking Marcus. The beach walk Patricia had mentioned was optional, but I needed the time to clear my head and prepare for what I knew would be a challenging day. The resort's private beach was nearly empty at 6 a.m., just a few early joggers and the sound of waves against the shore. Patricia and 3 other women were already waiting by the pier, all of them looking refreshed and ready for the day. "Claire, I'm so glad you made it," Patricia called out. "I wasn't sure if Marcus would let you escape this early." The comment was made lightly, but there was an undercurrent of understanding in her voice that told me Marcus's controlling behavior wasn't as invisible as he thought. As we walked along the shoreline, the conversation flowed easily from work to family to personal dreams and challenges. These women were accomplished professionals in their own right. Patricia ran her own consulting firm. Maria was a federal judge. Susan had started a nonprofit that provided microloans to women entrepreneurs. They spoke about their marriages, their children, their career ambitions with the kind of candor that comes from mutual respect and shared experience. "You seem different than you did a few years ago," Maria observed as we paused to watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "More present, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said. "I spent a lot of years trying to be who I thought everyone else wanted me to be. It took me a while to remember who I actually was." Susan nodded knowingly. "That's the trap of marriage sometimes, isn't it? We think love means shrinking ourselves to fit into someone else's vision of who we should be. But real love should make us bigger, not smaller." The conversation stayed with me as I returned to the room, where Marcus was just getting out of the shower. "Where were you?" he asked, though he'd clearly seen me leave. "Beach walk with some of the other women. You should have told me you were going. You were asleep. You still should have told me." I looked at him, this man who believed he had the right to monitor my every movement, to approve or disapprove of my choices, to grant or deny permission for basic human activities. "Marcus, I'm a grown woman. I don't need to ask your permission to take a walk on the beach." His face darkened. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You come to one company event, and suddenly you think you can do whatever you want." "I can do whatever I want. That's what being an adult means." "Not when you're married, Claire. Marriage is about partnership, about considering your spouse before making decisions." "Like you considered me when you decided I was too fat for the beach last summer?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "We've been through this. That's not what I meant, and you know it." "I know exactly what you meant, and I know exactly what this is about. You're not worried about partnership or consideration. You're worried about control." Marcus tried a different approach, softening his voice and moving closer to me. "Baby, I'm just concerned about you. This whole transformation thing, the confidence, the new attitude, it's great, but I want to make sure you're not changing too much too fast. People might get the wrong idea about us, about our marriage." There it was again, the concern about appearances, about how my growth and confidence might reflect on him. Never any consideration for how his years of criticism and control had affected me. "What kind of wrong idea?" I asked. "That we're having problems, that you're unhappy, that you're looking for attention from other men." I stared at him for a long moment, this man who'd spent 8 years systematically destroying my self-esteem, who was now worried that rebuilding it might make people think we had problems. The irony was so complete it almost made me laugh. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we do have problems. I have been unhappy. And if my confidence threatens you so much that you think it makes me unfaithful, then maybe you should ask yourself why." He looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility that our marriage had real issues had never occurred to him. In his mind, the problems had all been mine. My weight, my insecurity, my failure to live up to his standards. The idea that his behavior might be problematic, that his need for control might be damaging, seemed to catch him completely off guard. Before he could respond, there was a knock at our door. Breakfast buffet opens in 10 minutes, called a cheerful voice from the hallway. The moment was broken, and Marcus retreated to his suitcase to choose his outfit for the day. I selected the coral bikini and sarong I'd packed, along with a white linen shirt that I could wear over it to the dining area. When Marcus saw my choice, his jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything directly. Instead, he held up the conservative black one-piece he'd bought. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. "It's going to be a long day in the sun. You might want more coverage." "I'll be fine," I said, applying sunscreen to my shoulders and arms. The motion felt natural, confident, unapologetic. The breakfast terrace was buzzing with conversation and laughter as couples and families prepared for a day of beach activities. I noticed several women in bikinis, cover-ups, and sundresses that revealed far more skin than my modest two-piece would. Marcus's concerns about appropriateness seemed even more ridiculous in context. As we filled our plates at the buffet, I overheard Patricia talking to another woman about the yoga class she'd signed up for. "It's on the beach at 11, she was saying. "The instructor is supposed to be amazing. She does these retreats all over California." "That sounds wonderful," I said, joining their conversation. "Do you know if there's still space?" "I'm sure there is. You should definitely come. It'll be such a beautiful setting with the ocean right there." Marcus appeared at my elbow with his loaded plate. "Yoga?" he said with poorly concealed skepticism. "Since when are you interested in yoga?" "I've been taking classes for the past few months," I said calmly. "I really enjoy it." The lie was small but significant. I'd been taking classes for almost 8 months. Not just a few, but I'd stopped mentioning my activities to Marcus because his responses were always critical or dismissive. It was easier to live my life without his commentary. "Well," Marcus said, clearly improvising, "maybe I should join you. It might be fun to try something new together." Patricia looked between us with barely concealed amusement. "How sweet," she said. "Though I should warn you, this instructor is pretty advanced. She focuses a lot on core strength and flexibility." Marcus's enthusiasm visibly dimmed. He was in decent shape but had never shown any interest in activities that might challenge him physically or put him in a position where he might not excel immediately. "Actually, I think I'll stick with the golf tournament," he said. "But you ladies have fun." As breakfast wound down, people began dispersing to change for various beach activities: volleyball, golf, water sports, and yoga. Marcus lingered at our table, clearly reluctant to let me out of his sight for extended periods. "What time does your yoga thing end?" he asked. "Probably around noon." Then I thought I might spend some time by the pool before lunch. "I'll meet you at the pool then. The golf should be finished by 1. It wasn't a suggestion or a request for my preference. It was an instruction disguised as a plan, another attempt to control my schedule and monitor my interactions. But I was beyond arguing about every small assertion of independence. I simply nodded and excused myself to change. Back in our room, I stood before the bathroom mirror in my coral bikini and felt a rush of something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my own body. Not because it was perfect or met some external standard, but because it was strong and healthy and mine. The woman looking back at me had curves and softness and muscle definition from months of yoga and strength training. She looked capable, confident, alive. I slipped the white linen shirt over my bikini and added the coral sarong around my waist. The outfit was modest by beach standards, but showed more of my body than Marcus had seen me reveal in public for years. I felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was the good kind. The anticipation of stepping outside my comfort zone rather than the anxiety of facing criticism. When I emerged from the bathroom, Marcus was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed in golf attire. His eyes swept over my outfit, and I could see him calculating, weighing the risks and benefits of objecting versus letting it go. Finally, he settled on passive-aggressive commentary. "That's quite a statement piece," he said. "Very bold." "Thank you," I said, choosing to interpret his words as a compliment rather than the criticism they were intended to be. As I gathered my yoga mat and water bottle, Marcus made one last attempt at control. You know, if you change your mind about the yoga, I'm sure the golf course could accommodate one more player. Might be fun to spend the morning together. For just a moment, I felt the old familiar pull to defer to his preference, to choose his comfort over my own desires. It would be so easy to say yes, to avoid whatever conflict my independence might create, to slip back into the pattern of making myself smaller to keep him happy. Instead, I smiled and kissed his cheek. Have fun on the golf course. I'll see you at lunch. The beach yoga class was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. 23 women gathered on yoga mats spread across the sand, with the Pacific Ocean providing a soundtrack of gentle waves and crying seagulls. The instructor, a serene woman named Luna with silver hair and sun-weathered skin, led us through a series of poses that challenged our balance and core strength, while encouraging us to breathe deeply and connect with the natural beauty around us. As we moved through the sequences, I felt my body responding with strength and flexibility I'd been building for months. The warrior poses felt powerful. The balance poses felt grounding. The back bends felt like opening my heart to possibilities. Around me, I could hear other women breathing, sighing with effort and satisfaction, occasionally laughing when a particularly challenging pose made us wobble. During Savasana, the final resting pose, I lay on my back with my eyes closed, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin and listening to the rhythm of the waves. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with who I was and where I was in my life. Not perfect, not finished with my growth, but aligned with my own values and desires, rather than constantly trying to meet someone else's expectations. After class, several of the women lingered on the beach, chatting about the poses, the instructor, their travels, and their lives. I found myself in easy conversation with strangers who felt like instant friends, sharing stories and laughter in a way that felt natural and unforced. This was who I'd been before. Marcus's criticism had made me doubt my own social instincts. Someone who connected easily with others, who had things to contribute to conversations, who was interesting and interested in the world around me. "You have such beautiful energy," said a woman named Rachel, who was attending the retreat with her husband from the Denver office. "There's something so grounded and confident about you. I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you remind me of myself when I finally started therapy and began untangling some old patterns that weren't serving me." Her words hit me with unexpected force. Without meaning to, she'd identified exactly what people were responding to in me. I was becoming authentic again, shedding the layers of doubt and self-criticism that had accumulated over years of emotional manipulation. As noon approached, I reluctantly gathered my yoga mat and prepared to head back to the resort. Several of the women exchanged contact information, making plans to stay in touch and possibly attend other retreats together. For the first time in years, I felt part of a community of women who saw and valued who I really was. The walk back to the pool area took me through the resort's lush gardens, past fountains and flowering bushes that seemed to celebrate the California sunshine. I felt light, energized, proud of myself for trying something new and connecting with interesting people. The morning had been exactly what I needed. Time to inhabit my own space without commentary or criticism. As I approached the pool deck, I could see Marcus already there, sitting at a small table under an umbrella, still in his golf clothes and checking his phone. He looked up as I approached, and his expression was unreadable, something between relief that I'd returned and disapproval of how I looked after my morning of independence. "How was yoga?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Wonderful. Really challenging and peaceful at the same time. How was golf?" "Fine. Shot an 87, which isn't terrible for a course I've never played." He paused, studying my face. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Glowing, I guess. Like you just had some kind of revelation or something." The observation was more accurate than he knew, but I wasn't ready to share the depth of what I was discovering about myself. Instead, I shrugged and said, "I think it's just the endorphins from exercise and the ocean air." Marcus nodded, seeming to accept this explanation, but I could see him cataloging the changes in my appearance and demeanor, trying to assess what they might mean for his position in our relationship. The woman who'd returned from yoga was even more confident than the one who'd left for it, and that clearly made him nervous. "So," he said, reaching for my hand in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive, "what do you want to do this afternoon? We could get drinks by the pool, maybe take a walk on the beach, or just relax in the room for a while." All of his suggestions involved activities we'd do together, under his supervision and control. None of them acknowledged that I might have my own preferences or desires for how to spend the afternoon. It was such a perfectly Marcus response that I almost admired its predictability. "Actually," I said, slipping my hand free to adjust my sarong, "I was thinking of spending some time by the pool reading, and then Patricia mentioned there's a wine tasting at 4 that sounds interesting." "Wine tasting?" Marcus's eyebrows raised. "That's not really your thing, is it?" The comment revealed how little he actually knew about my preferences anymore, or perhaps how much he'd trained himself to believe I didn't have preferences worth considering. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never tried it, but I'd like to." For the next 2 hours, I claimed a lounge chair by the pool and lost myself in a novel I'd been meaning to read for months. The book was set in Tuscany and followed a woman who'd left her comfortable but unfulfilling life to open a bed and breakfast in a small Italian village. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me, though my revolution was happening within my existing life rather than requiring me to flee to another country. Marcus spent the time alternating between reading work emails on his phone and watching me with poorly concealed surveillance. Every few minutes he'd make a comment or ask a question that seemed designed to remind me of his presence, rather than stemming from genuine interest in my thoughts or activities. When a server came by offering fresh fruit and sparkling water, Marcus ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. When another guest complimented my book choice, Marcus jumped into the conversation to explain that I was really into that women's fiction stuff, as if my reading preferences were a charming quirk rather than legitimate literary interests. Each small assertion of his authority felt like sand in my shoes, not individually painful, but collectively exhausting and irritating. I found myself wondering how many thousands of these micro-corrections and dismissals I'd accepted over the years, how they'd accumulated into a sense that my thoughts and preferences didn't matter. As 4 o'clock approached, I gathered my things and prepared to head to the wine tasting. Marcus immediately stood as well, as if we'd previously agreed he would join me. "I thought you weren't interested in wine tasting," I said. "Well, it might be fun to learn something new together. Besides, I don't want you wandering around a wine event by yourself. These things can get a little loose, if you know what I mean." The wine tasting was held in the resort's private cellar, a temperature-controlled room with exposed stone walls and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of understated elegance. About 30 guests had gathered around high cocktail tables, each setting equipped with several wine glasses and small plates of artisanal cheeses and crackers. The sommelier, a passionate woman named Isabella who'd flown in from Napa Valley specifically for this event, began explaining the evening's selection of wines from boutique California vineyards. Marcus positioned himself slightly behind my left shoulder, close enough that his presence felt like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every time someone approached our table or initiated a conversation, I could feel his tension radiating through the small space between us. When Isabella began describing the first wine, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc with notes of grapefruit and herbs, Marcus immediately declared that white wines were too acidic for his taste, as if his personal preference somehow dictated what everyone else should enjoy. "Actually, I love the brightness of this one," I said, taking another sip and genuinely appreciating the way the wine seemed to capture sunshine in liquid form. "It reminds me of summer afternoons in my grandmother's garden." The comment came naturally, without any consideration for Marcus's approval or disagreement, and I realized how long it had been since I'd expressed a genuine opinion about something as simple as taste preferences. Patricia appeared at our table just as Isabella moved on to discussing the second wine, a Pinot Noir from Sonoma County. "Claire, I'm so glad you made it. Isn't this fascinating?" I had no idea there was so much complexity involved in winemaking. She was genuinely enthusiastic, her eyes bright with curiosity and the slight flush that comes from discovering something unexpectedly engaging. "It really is," I agreed, swirling the ruby liquid in my glass and inhaling the aroma as Isabella had demonstrated. I keep thinking about all the decisions that went into creating each bottle, from the soil preparation to the harvest timing to the aging process. It's like each wine tells a story. Marcus cleared his throat pointedly. I think you might be romanticizing it a bit, Claire. At the end of the day, it's just fermented grapes with some marketing spin. The dismissal was so automatic, so reflexive, that I don't think he even realized he'd done it. But Patricia's eyebrows shot up slightly, and I caught a flash of something that might have been pity in her expression before she quickly recovered her social smile. Well, Patricia said diplomatically, I suppose some people appreciate the artistry and others prefer the straightforward approach. She turned back to me with deliberate focus. What did you think of that Chardonnay we tried earlier? The one with the oak aging? For the next hour, I found myself engaged in genuine conversations about flavor profiles, vineyard locations, and the stories behind different winemakers. Other guests joined and left our impromptu discussion group, sharing their own experiences with wine country visits and favorite discoveries. Marcus contributed occasionally, but mostly in the form of corrections or contradictions, rather than additions to the conversation. When someone mentioned a wine bar in downtown San Diego that featured small production vintages, Marcus quickly interjected that we wouldn't have time to visit it during our stay because we had, quote, other commitments. When Isabella mentioned that many of the featured vineyards offered tours for small groups, Marcus explained that we weren't, quote, really wine tour people, before I'd had a chance to express any interest or lack thereof. The pattern was so consistent that I began to wonder if other people noticed it, this constant presumption of speaking for me, of defining what I did or didn't enjoy, of shutting down possibilities before I could even consider them. Based on Patricia's increasingly strained smiles and the way other guests sometimes paused mid-sentence when Marcus interrupted, I suspected his behavior was more obvious than he realized. As the tasting wound down, Isabella announced that she'd be available for individual consultations if anyone wanted personalized recommendations for wines to purchase or regions to visit. Several people immediately signed up for brief conversations, and I found myself genuinely interested in learning more about the wines I'd enjoyed most. That sounds like fun, I said, adding my name to Isabella's list. Claire, Marcus said quietly, his hand finding my elbow in a grip that looked casual but felt controlling. We should probably head back to the room. It's been a long day, and we have the beach barbecue tonight. The beach barbecue isn't until 7, I pointed out. And this will only take a few minutes. Still, I think it's better if we… Marcus, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I'd like to talk to the sommelier. Were perfectly appropriate for a beach barbecue. Both made me feel confident and attractive. Both would probably be dismissed by Marcus as too much for a company event. I was thinking about the white dress, I said casually, pulling it from the closet and holding it up to assess how it had traveled. Marcus glanced over and his expression immediately tightened. Don't you think that's a little revealing for a work function? It has a perfectly modest neckline and falls below my knees. I think it's quite appropriate. Claire, I'm just thinking about impressions. This is my company, my colleagues. I need to make sure we're presenting ourselves professionally. There was that word again, we, as if I were merely an extension of him, rather than an individual person with my own judgment and taste. The assumption that my clothing choices were primarily about reflecting his reputation, rather than expressing my own style or making me feel confident and comfortable. Marcus, I said, meeting his eyes directly, I'm not going to wear something that makes me feel frumpy and invisible just to ease your insecurity about how other people perceive your wife. The words came out more directly than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. The truth was that his constant anxiety about appearances had less to do with actual appropriateness and more to do with his need to control how others saw me. He wanted me attractive enough to reflect well on his taste, but not so attractive that I might draw attention or interest from other people. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, clearly processing this new version of his wife who spoke back, who named his behavior, who refused to be managed like a wayward child. I'm not insecure, he said finally. I'm just being practical. No, you're being controlling. And I'm done pretending that's the same thing as caring. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus turned away first, returning to his clothes selection with forced casualness, but I could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands moved with barely suppressed agitation. I had crossed some invisible line, violated some unspoken rule about wifely compliance that he'd never had to articulate because I'd never challenged it before. I hung the white dress on the bathroom door and began gathering my toiletries for a shower. The ritual of preparing for the evening felt different now, charged with the significance of choices made consciously rather than defaulting to what would cause the least conflict. As I stepped under the hot water, I realized I was looking forward to the barbecue in a way I hadn't anticipated social events in years. When I emerged from the bathroom 45 minutes later, hair styled and makeup applied with care, Marcus was already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone. He looked up as I entered, and I saw his expression shift from irritation to something more complicated, surprise, maybe even admiration, quickly followed by what looked like alarm. The white dress fit perfectly, skimming my curves without clinging, the soft fabric moving gracefully as I walked. I'd paired it with simple gold jewelry and sandals that added just enough height to make me feel elegant. My hair caught the light from the bathroom, and my skin had a healthy glow from the morning of sun and exercise. I looked like myself again, the version of myself I'd been before. Years of criticism had trained me to hide behind shapeless clothes and apologetic posture. "You look," Marcus began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with competing impulses. Part of him, I could see, was genuinely appreciative of how I looked. But another part was calculating the risks of bringing this version of his wife to a company event where other people might notice and appreciate her as well. "Thank you," I said simply, not waiting for him to finish the thought or qualify the compliment with suggestions for modification. As we made our way to the beach, I could feel Marcus's tension radiating through the evening air. He walked slightly ahead of me, as was his habit, but kept glancing back to monitor my "welcome to wait for me, or you can head back to the room and I'll meet you there." The offer of choice was generous, but also strategic. By presenting options rather than simply defying his preference, I was demonstrating that I wasn't being rebellious or difficult. I was simply making my own decision about how to spend my time. The distinction might seem subtle, but it was crucial for maintaining my own sense of agency without providing him with ammunition to paint me as unreasonable. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he was trapped by the public setting and the reasonableness of my tone. "Fine," he said. "I'll wait." But the word came out clipped and cold, a small punishment for my insistence on autonomy. My consultation with Isabella was brief but illuminating. She recommended several wines that aligned with the flavor profiles I'd enjoyed, explained the characteristics that made certain vintages special, and gave me the names of a few wine shops in my hometown that carried boutique California selections. More importantly, she treated my interest as legitimate and valuable, asking thoughtful questions about my preferences and taking notes about my responses. "You have a really good palate," she said as our conversation concluded. "Have you ever considered taking a wine appreciation class? There are some excellent programs that go beyond just tasting and really dive into the history and culture behind different wine regions." The suggestion sparked immediate interest, and I found myself imagining Saturday mornings spent learning about French terroir or Italian grape varieties, surrounded by other people who shared this newfound curiosity. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Do you know of any programs in the Los Angeles area?" Isabella pulled out her phone and quickly jotted down several recommendations on the back of her business card. "These are all excellent," she said, handing me the card. "The first one is probably the most comprehensive if you're really interested in diving deep." As I tucked the card into my purse, I caught Marcus watching the exchange with barely concealed irritation. In his mind, I was sure, this was exactly the kind of impractical interest that would lead to expensive classes, weekend commitments, and time spent away from home and his oversight. The fact that I might genuinely enjoy learning something new, or that expanding my knowledge might bring me satisfaction, wouldn't factor into his calculations. We walked back to our room in relative silence, Marcus checking his phone repeatedly while I mentally replayed the conversations from the wine tasting. It had been months since I'd felt so intellectually engaged, so genuinely curious about something beyond the narrow confines of my daily routine. The realization was both exciting and sobering. Exciting because it reminded me of interests and capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed. sobering because it highlighted how much I'd allowed my world to shrink over the years of our marriage. Back in our room, Marcus immediately began preparing for the evening's beach barbecue, laying out clothes and checking the event schedule with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for work presentations. "The barbecue starts at 7, but I think we should arrive right on time," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Not too early, not too late. And Claire, maybe you could wear that blue sundress you brought? The one with sleeves?" The suggestion was phrased as a request, but I recognized the underlying expectation. The blue dress was conservative, modest, designed to cover rather than flatter. It was the kind of outfit that would render me invisible in a crowd, appropriately decorative, without being distracting. For years, I'd automatically deferred to such suggestions, grateful that he cared enough about my appearance to offer guidance. Now, however, I found myself considering the other options I'd packed. A flowing white dress with thin straps that showed my shoulders and arms. A vibrant green wraparound dress that highlighted my waist and moved beautifully when I walked. Both interactions with other guests we passed in the hallway and elevator. When the hotel manager complimented my dress and asked if I was enjoying the resort, Marcus quickly stepped in to handle the conversation, as if I couldn't be trusted to represent us appropriately without his oversight. The beach barbecue was spectacular in the way that only California resort events can be. Twinkling lights strung between palm trees, tables laden with fresh seafood and grilled vegetables, a live band playing jazz standards as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon. The setting was so beautiful it seemed almost surreal, like stepping into a movie about the life I'd always imagined wealthy, successful people must live. As we approached the gathering, several people immediately noticed and complimented my appearance. "Claire, you look absolutely stunning," called David Chen, the Hong Kong office director I'd spoken with the night before. "That dress is perfect for you." Patricia echoed the sentiment, mentioning how the color made my skin glow, and even some of the men's wives who'd barely acknowledged me at previous company events made a point of saying how wonderful I looked. Marcus accepted these compliments on my behalf with the kind of possessive pride that suggested he was somehow responsible for my appearance, but I could see him mentally cataloging each positive response, each admiring glance, each moment when attention focused on me rather than automatically deferring to him. The woman he'd trained to be invisible was becoming increasingly visible, and he wasn't sure how to manage that shift. As the evening progressed, I found myself moving through the party with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Conversations flowed easily, ranging from travel recommendations, to book suggestions, to discussions about the challenges of work-life balance in high-pressure careers. People seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions, asking follow-up questions, and remembering details from previous conversations. I was reminded of how much I'd always enjoyed meeting new people, how energizing it could be to exchange ideas with interesting individuals who saw me as worth getting to know. Marcus shadowed my movements throughout the night, never more than a few feet away, jumping into conversations whenever they seemed to be moving in directions he couldn't predict or control. When Maria Rodriguez from the legal department mentioned a book club she'd started that focused on contemporary women authors, Marcus quickly noted that I was more of a commercial fiction reader before I could express interest in joining. When David Chen asked about my marketing work and whether I might be interested in consulting on a project in Asia, Marcus immediately listed all the reasons why international travel would be complicated for us right now. Each intervention was smooth, practiced, designed to look like helpful context rather than deliberate sabotage. But the pattern was becoming increasingly obvious, at least to me. Marcus couldn't bear to let me exist as an independent person in social situations, couldn't tolerate the possibility that I might form connections or pursue opportunities without his mediation and approval. The moment that changed everything came about 2 hours into the party, when I excused myself to visit the restroom. The facilities were located in the resort's main building, requiring a short walk through the gardens and lobby. As I made my way back toward the beach, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. "Claire? Oh my God, Claire Morrison?" I turned to see a woman approaching with a mixture of surprise and delight on her face. It took me a moment to place her. She was thinner than I remembered, her dark hair now highlighted with silver, but the warm smile was unmistakable. "Vanessa Sterling," she said, extending her hand. We met several years ago at one of these company retreats. I'm Marcus's, I suppose I should say I'm Marcus's ex-girlfriend. We dated for about 3 years before he met you. The introduction was matter-of-fact, without any underlying tension or awkwardness. Vanessa had moved on, clearly, and seemed genuinely pleased to see me rather than harboring any residual romantic feelings about Marcus. But her presence immediately explained Marcus's unusual level of anxiety about this particular retreat. Of course, I said, though my memories of meeting her were vague. It's nice to see you again. Are you here with the company? My husband, actually, Vanessa laughed, gesturing toward a tall man with graying temples who was deep in conversation near the bar. Richard started working with Marcus's firm about a year ago, so we got invited to these events again. Strange how life comes full circle sometimes. She paused, studying my face with the kind of attention women pay to other women when they're trying to reconcile memory with current reality. You look absolutely incredible, she continued. I mean, you were always attractive, but there's something different about you now. More alive, I suppose. More present. You seem so confident and comfortable in your own skin. The compliment was generous and seemed genuinely meant, but it also carried an implicit comparison to how I'd appeared at previous company events. I tried to remember the last time I'd interacted with Vanessa, probably 3 or 4 years ago when I'd been deep in the worst period of my self-doubt and withdrawal. She would have seen the version of me that barely spoke at parties, that hid behind Marcus's opinions and apologized for taking up space. Thank you, I said. I've been focusing on taking better care of myself lately, both physically and emotionally. It's made a big difference in how I feel. It shows, Vanessa said warmly. There's an energy about you that's just magnetic. I bet people are drawn to you in a way they weren't before. She glanced toward the beach where the party was still in full swing. How are things with Marcus? He seems exactly the same as always. There was something in her tone that suggested layers of meaning I couldn't quite decipher. Not bitterness exactly, but perhaps a recognition of certain patterns she'd experienced during their relationship. I found myself curious about her perspective on the man I'd been married to for 8 years. Marcus is Marcus, I said carefully, not wanting to air marital problems with someone I barely knew, regardless of her history with my husband. Vanessa nodded knowingly. That's certainly true. He's never been one to change or adapt very easily. Very set in his ways. Very particular about how things should be. She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Can I ask you something personal? And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business. I nodded, genuinely curious about what she wanted to know. Are you happy? The question was direct, without preamble or qualification. I mean really happy, not just comfortable or settled, but genuinely fulfilled and joyful about your life? The question hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had asked me about my happiness as if it mattered, as if my answer would be taken seriously rather than dismissed or minimized? I found myself considering the question more deeply than Vanessa had probably intended, thinking about the difference between contentment and genuine joy, between accepting my circumstances and actively choosing them. That's a complicated question, I said finally. I'm in a period of transition, I suppose. Figuring out what happiness looks like for me now, as opposed to what I thought it should look like. Vanessa smiled with what looked like recognition. I remember that feeling. The beginning of realizing that you get to define your own life, your own priorities, your own version of success and satisfaction. She glanced again toward the beach, and I followed her gaze to see Marcus scanning the crowd with obvious agitation, clearly looking for me. He's worried about you, Vanessa observed. Or maybe worried about what you might be doing or saying without him there to supervise. There was no malice in her voice, just the weary recognition of someone who'd navigated similar dynamics. Were things like that when you were together? I asked, surprised by my own boldness in pursuing the topic. Vanessa considered the question for a moment. Marcus is a good man in many ways, she said carefully. He's loyal, hardworking, financially responsible, but he has very definite ideas about how relationships should work, how women should behave, What constitutes appropriate behavior and what doesn't? For someone like me, who's always been fairly independent and opinionated, it became suffocating. The word hit me like a physical sensation. Suffocating. It perfectly captured the feeling I'd been struggling to name for months. The sense that I couldn't breathe deeply or move freely within the confines of my marriage. The thing about Marcus, Vanessa continued, is that he genuinely believes he's being helpful, protective, loving. He doesn't see his behavior as controlling because in his mind he's just trying to guide you toward making better choices. He can't conceive of the possibility that his judgment might not be superior to yours, or that you might have valid reasons for wanting things he doesn't understand or approve of. Her analysis was so accurate it made me feel exposed, as if she could see directly into the dynamics of my marriage with X-ray vision. How did it end between you two? I moved to Portland for a job opportunity, Vanessa said. Marcus was furious that I'd even consider relocating without consulting him extensively first, even though we weren't married or even engaged. He couldn't understand why I'd prioritize my career advancement over proximity to him and his preferences for where we should live. When I went ahead and took the job anyway, he said I was being selfish and short-sighted, that I was throwing away our relationship for something that probably wouldn't make me happy anyway. She paused, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The funny thing is, he was wrong on all counts. The job was incredible, I loved Portland, I met Richard within 6 months of moving there, and I was infinitely happier making my own choices than I'd been seeking Marcus's approval for everything. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus himself, who appeared at my side with barely concealed relief and irritation. "There you are," he said, his hand immediately finding my elbow in that possessive grip I'd come to recognize. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." "Hello, Marcus," Vanessa said with friendly warmth that seemed genuine. "I was just catching up with your lovely wife. She looks absolutely radiant." Marcus's expression shifted rapidly through several emotions. Surprise at seeing Vanessa, calculation about what our conversation might have covered, and something that looked almost like panic at the idea of his past and present colliding without his orchestration. "Vanessa," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I didn't know you were going to be here. Richard joined your firm last year, so we're part of the company family now," she explained easily. "It's nice to see you again. You look well." "You too," Marcus replied, though his attention was clearly focused on extracting me from the conversation as quickly as possible. "Claire, we should probably head back to the party. People will be wondering where we've gone." "Actually," Vanessa interjected before I could respond, "I was hoping Claire and I could continue our conversation over coffee tomorrow morning. It's so rare to meet someone with such interesting perspectives on marketing trends, and I'd love to pick her brain about some challenges we're facing in our Portland office." I felt Marcus's grip on my elbow tighten slightly, his silent signal that this was not a development he approved of. But Vanessa's invitation was professional, appropriate, and offered in front of witnesses. Declining would require an explanation that Marcus couldn't provide without revealing his controlling tendencies. "That sounds wonderful," I said, before Marcus could formulate a response. "What time works for you?" "How about 8:30? We could meet in the resort's cafe before the day gets too busy." "Perfect," I agreed, genuinely looking forward to continuing our conversation away from Marcus's oversight and intervention. As we said our goodbyes and began walking back toward the beach, Marcus was unusually quiet. I could practically feel him processing the encounter, trying to determine what damage might have been done and how to contain any potential fallout. The idea that his ex-girlfriend and current wife might develop an independent friendship was clearly something he found deeply threatening. "What did you two talk about?" he asked finally, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his underlying anxiety. "This and that," I said vaguely. "Work, life in different cities, how much the company has changed over the years. Why?" "No reason. Vanessa can be a bit dramatic sometimes. She has strong opinions about relationships and tends to project her own experiences onto other people's situations." The warning was subtle but clear. Whatever Vanessa had told me about her relationship with Marcus, or relationships in general, should be taken with significant skepticism. It was a preemptive strike against her credibility, designed to undermine any insight she might have shared that contradicted Marcus's preferred narrative. "She seemed very balanced and thoughtful to me," I said neutrally. "Happy in her marriage, successful in her career. Whatever issues you two had seemed to be ancient history." Marcus nodded, but I could see him filing away my positive impression of Vanessa as another potential problem to monitor and manage. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections, but I found my attention drifting repeatedly to Vanessa's question. "Are you happy?" The question followed me back to our room, through Marcus's extended analysis of the evening's conversations and connections, and into the restless sleep that came with major decisions looming just beyond conscious thought. Tomorrow's coffee with Vanessa felt like more than a social engagement. It felt like a doorway into possibilities I'd been afraid to imagine. The next morning arrived with the kind of perfect California sunshine that makes everything seem possible. I woke before Marcus, slipping quietly from bed to prepare for my coffee meeting with Vanessa. As I selected a casual but flattering outfit, I realized I was looking forward to the conversation, with an anticipation I hadn't felt about a social engagement in years. Marcus stirred as I was applying lip gloss in the bathroom mirror. "Where are you going so early?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep and suspicion. "Coffee with Vanessa, remember? We arranged it last night." He sat up abruptly, suddenly fully awake. "Claire, I've been thinking about that. Maybe it's not such a good idea. Vanessa has a tendency to overshare about personal things, and I'd hate for you to feel uncomfortable." The objection was phrased as concern for my well-being, but I recognized it for what it really was: an attempt to prevent me from gaining perspective on our relationship from someone who knew Marcus's patterns intimately. "I'm sure I can handle whatever she might share," I said calmly. "Besides, she mentioned wanting to discuss some professional opportunities, and I'm genuinely interested in hearing about them." Marcus's expression darkened. "What kind of professional opportunities?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm meeting with her to find out." The idea that I might pursue work opportunities without his input or approval clearly agitated him more than he wanted to reveal. After 8 years of marriage, he'd become accustomed to being the primary breadwinner and decision-maker, with my sporadic freelance work serving more as a hobby than a serious career pursuit. I kissed his forehead and headed for the door before he could formulate additional objections. "I'll be back in an hour or so. Why don't you sleep in and enjoy the morning?" The resort's cafe was nearly empty at 8:30, with only a few early risers sipping coffee and reading newspapers on the outdoor terrace. Vanessa was already seated at a corner table with an ocean view, looking relaxed and professional in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants. She waved me over with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you came," she said as I settled into the chair across from her. "I have to admit, I had an ulterior motive for suggesting this meeting. After seeing you last night and talking with you briefly, I kept thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you." A server appeared to take my coffee order, giving me a moment to wonder what Vanessa might have observed or concluded about my situation. When we were alone again, she leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but kind. "Claire, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I recognize something in you that I remember seeing in myself during the last year of my relationship with Marcus. There's a woman in there who's fighting to get out, who's tired of being managed and diminished and told what she should want or think or feel." Her words hit me with such accuracy that I felt tears prick at my eyes. The relief of being seen and understood by someone who'd walked a similar path was overwhelming. "I don't know what your situation is exactly," Vanessa continued, "and I'm not presuming to give you advice about your marriage, but I do want you to know that there are options, opportunities, ways to reclaim your life and your sense of self that you might not have considered." She paused to sip her coffee, giving me time to process what she'd said. "The marketing opportunity I mentioned last night is real. My husband's company is expanding into the Asian market, and they need someone with your specific skill set to help develop their strategy. It would involve travel, significant responsibility, and compensation that would give you real financial independence." The offer was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed, that I could barely process it. For years, Marcus had convinced me that my marketing background was outdated, that I lacked the current knowledge and connections to compete in today's market. The idea that someone would actively seek out my expertise felt surreal. "I know this is sudden," Vanessa said, reading my expression accurately. "And I know there would be complications to consider. But Claire, you have so much to offer the world. Watching you last night, seeing your intelligence and warmth and natural leadership ability, it broke my heart to think that you might not know how valuable you are." I found my voice finally. Marcus would never support something like that. The travel alone would be impossible for him to accept. "Would it be impossible for you?" Vanessa asked gently. "Or just impossible for him?" The question reframed everything. I'd become so accustomed to filtering opportunities through Marcus's preferences and comfort level, but I'd stopped considering what I might actually want or be capable of achieving. "I spent 3 years of my life trying to make Marcus happy by making myself smaller," Vanessa continued. "I convinced myself that love meant sacrificing my goals and ambitions for his sense of security. It took me leaving to realize that real love should make you bigger, braver, more yourself than you ever thought possible." Her words echoed what Susan had said during our beach walk, but coming from someone who'd been intimately involved with Marcus, they carried additional weight. This wasn't theoretical advice from a well-meaning acquaintance. This was hard-earned wisdom from someone who'd escaped the same trap I was in. "The job offer is genuine, and it's yours if you want it," Vanessa said, sliding her business card across the table. "But more than that, I want you to know that whatever you decide to do with your life, you have support. Women who've been where you are, who understand what it takes to reclaim yourself, who believe you're worth fighting for, even when you're not sure you believe it yourself." We talked for another hour about everything from career strategies, to relationship patterns, to the challenge of rebuilding confidence after years of psychological manipulation. Vanessa shared stories from her own journey of self-discovery, the fears she'd faced and the victories she'd celebrated, the way her life had expanded once she stopped seeking permission to exist fully. When we finally parted ways, I felt like I'd been given a roadmap to a life I'd barely dared to imagine. The job offer was tempting, but even more valuable was the validation that I was capable of, more than Marcus had led me to believe. That my instincts about my own potential weren't delusional or selfish. Walking back to the resort room, I felt a strange combination of exhilaration and terror. The conversation with Vanessa had crystallized something I'd been avoiding for months. The recognition that I had genuine choices to make about my future, choices that didn't require Marcus's approval or understanding. Marcus was waiting for me in the room, fully dressed and clearly agitated. "How did it go?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral but his body language revealing his anxiety. "Very well," I said simply. "Vanessa offered me a job." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Marcus's face went through several rapid changes of expression before settling on forced calm. "What kind of job?" I explained the opportunity briefly, watching his reaction carefully. As expected, he immediately began listing reasons why it would be impractical, risky, potentially damaging to our relationship and my well-being. "Claire, you can't seriously be considering this. Working for my ex-girlfriend's husband's company? Can you imagine how that would look? And the travel requirements alone would be impossible. We've built a life here, together. Why would you want to jeopardize that for some uncertain opportunity with people you barely know?" His arguments were predictable but no longer persuasive. I could see them now for what they were. Attempts to keep me contained within the narrow boundaries of his comfort zone, regardless of what might be best for my growth or happiness. "I haven't decided anything yet," I said calmly. "But Marcus, I want you to really think about what you just said. You're asking me to turn down a significant career opportunity because of how it might look to other people, and because the travel would inconvenience you. At no point did you ask whether this is something I might want to do or whether it might be good for me personally or professionally." Marcus stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The idea that my desires might be valid independent of his approval seemed genuinely incomprehensible to him. "Of course I care about what's good for you," he said finally. "But Claire, you have to be realistic. You've been out of the corporate world for years. This could be overwhelming, stressful. What if you fail? What if it doesn't work out? Then you'd be stuck in Portland, Oregon, Hong Kong, or wherever, away from everything familiar, with nothing to show for it. What if I succeed? I countered. What if I'm good at it? What if it leads to other opportunities and I end up happier and more fulfilled than I've been in years? The possibility seemed not to have occurred to him. In Marcus's worldview, my contentment came from serving his needs and maintaining our established routine. The idea that I might thrive in ways that didn't center around him was not just threatening, it was literally unthinkable. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in downtown Portland, watching the sun set over the Willamette River and reflecting on the series of choices that had brought me to this moment. The job with Richard's company had exceeded every expectation. I was traveling regularly throughout Asia, developing marketing strategies for expanding businesses, working with brilliant colleagues who valued my insights and expertise. More importantly, I had rediscovered myself. The confident, capable woman Marcus had systematically diminished was thriving in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I woke up excited about my days, energized by challenges, surrounded by people who saw me as valuable and interesting. The divorce had been as difficult as I'd expected, but not in the ways I'd feared. Marcus had been shocked, angry, then desperate as he realized I was serious about leaving. He'd promised to change, to be more supportive, to give me more freedom within our marriage. But I'd learned the difference between genuine transformation and temporary accommodation designed to regain control. The most surprising thing about leaving Marcus wasn't how hard it was, but how natural it felt once I'd made the decision. Like taking off shoes that had been too tight for so long that I'd forgotten feet weren't supposed to hurt all the time. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Jenny's name appeared on the screen, and I smiled as I answered. "How's the view from your new life?" she asked, her voice warm with genuine happiness for me. "Incredible," I said, and meant it. Absolutely incredible. Through my kitchen window, I could see neighbors coming home from work, couples walking dogs, children playing in the small park across the street. Real life, messy and complicated and beautiful, happening all around me. I was part of it now instead of watching from the sidelines. The transformation Marcus had been so afraid of at that beach resort had been even more complete than either of us could have imagined. The woman he'd called too fat for the beach had become someone he couldn't have kept contained, even if I'd stayed. The real change hadn't been physical. It had been the recognition that I deserved to take up space in the world, to pursue my dreams, to be valued for who I actually was, rather than who someone else thought I should become. Standing there in my new life, financially independent and emotionally free, I realized that Vanessa had been right about one thing above all others. Real love should make you bigger, not smaller. And I was finally, beautifully, expansively big. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.